Welcome to today's Conversation Podcast. The Conversation Podcast, brings two people together to discuss national matters through the lenses of a special guest that we host. Today we're privileged to host Amos Chanda. He's currently a private consultant in media and communications. He also consults on governance, investor relations, and corporate affairs. But he's famously known when he was spokesperson for Zambia's sixth president, Dr. Edgar Chagwa Lungu. Before that, he was a diplomat in London, and many will remember that again he was at State House earlier in the presidency of President Michael Sata. Amos Chanda, welcome to today's podcast.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. I'm happy to be here.
How have you been?
I've been all right, thanks, in the private sector, away from the cameras, but I've been well.
Wonderful, wonderful. You are a renowned journalist. I think many people remember when you were Press Association of Zambia president, then PAZA, you vice president, and I think acted as president for a long time. You are known for your media advocacy. What took you to journalism?
What took me to journalism was an accident of ambition and the crisis of the mother's influence on their son. She wanted me to be a reverend. I was born in a Christian family in the United Church of Zambia, which I'm a very proud practicing member. So she was very clear. Yes, MCF. She laid the path very clear. Yeah. When you follow a path, or you go to theological college at Mindoro in Kitwe, or you are going to be a medical doctor or a lawyer. So you navigate across those paths. Then in between there, my passion was public affairs. If you become a lawyer, you can probably fulfill the ambitions that Mom wanted. But journalism was a natural attraction. In primary school, in secondary school, I was always a member of a club that was running a magazine. At even on college, I was one of the senior editors in the college magazine. So the calling of journalism, if you like, it's a calling in the real sense of it. So the movement towards there was natural. I later on went to do other things that I had earlier on wanted to do.
Yeah, before you went to PAZA, I think you joined the Zambia Daily Mail.
Yes.
And I think it was at a critical period, 1998 going towards 2001. But what do you remember first on the advent of multi-party democracy?
Yes, the advent of multi-party democracy, most in my formative years as an adult, it was at the time when there was a meltdown. The state had become too big, civil society had shrunk, so I was socialized to think that the political system was wrong. And then at that point, I began to dig deeper into my parents' political activism. I was not very much aware until the wind of change in the 1980s began to then, the conversations between my late father and his friends clearly revealed that he was a very active member of the UPP under Simon Mwanawasa. So through that, I began to dig his history and his connection to the liberation struggle through Simon Mwanawasa and Kenneth Kaunda. He told me, as a very young person, he admired both men and he met them in Chinsadi, where he came from. So he began to think that the seed that Kapwepwe planted had been extinguished, killed by the wrong people, he insisted, that surrounded Dr. Kenneth Kaunda and misled him from the very lofty ambition and vision of the country. So I began to follow those processes. 1991, and I was just finishing my secondary school in there. So I followed those things and I was socialized and made to be aware that that the best political philosophy is the one that sides with the greater majority. My support, although I was not a member, as a very young person, activist of the MMD then, was obviously natural.
Yeah. Tell us, when you've left Evelyn Horn, you've studied journalism, and you walk into the practice of journalism at the Zambia Daily Mail.
Yeah. First, I was an intern at the Post newspaper when it was at Kanjombe House during our what they called industrial break, and I practiced there with a friend of mine, Mwanawasa and Lungu, Nick Shavorio. I think Kunda Mwira was there at that time, Joe Kaunda. I think Amos Mwamba, my namesake, was just joining us from another publication where he was. So I did some internship there. Then after the internship, the editors of newspapers were always going through career talks in colleges. So the Zambia Daily Mail employed me when I was 4 months away from completing my studies at Evelyn Horn College.
Okay.
Which is why within 2 years, when I was there, it takes an average of 10 years to get into the editorial board of a national newspaper. In 2 years, I was one of the line editors, one of the 7 editors who can become news editor and therefore can become editor. So I was fast-tracked into there.
Because they poached you from school.
Yes, and became features editor, features and supplements, and I became news editor. One of the senior most, basically you run the newspaper. Outside of the management, money and other things, the entire newspaper is under the command and control of the news editor, which is the last position I held. So I rose very quickly in 3 years from a cab reporter, which is a junior most position, to news editor, which is number 3 from being the overall editor-in-chief of the newspaper. So within there, at the time I joined, and Mr. Godfrey Marama came again in 1999, we got the Daily Mail sales from 3,000-4,000 within a year to over 25,000 copies. Because we transformed it. It became an activist newspaper. It was difficult at some point to recognize it as a state-owned newspaper. So it was a very exciting moment. And during that same time, when I was news editor at the state-run newspaper, I was also very active, involved in media activism, fight for media freedom, defense of journalists who ostensibly were under attack by the government that owned the newspaper where I worked.
Yeah, I think that brings us to the role of public media. I think at the time you were editor at Zambia Daily Mail, there was polarization between the private media and public media. So the sense of ownership came in. The private media, parroted an opposition agenda. And of course, in the public media also parroted government agenda. But that's a very difficult place to be for professionals from both platforms. Because how do you remain professional if the owner of a newspaper is trying to push an opposition agenda? Like you guys in public media, how do you push a professional angle when government wants you to parrot government stories?
That is the most difficult and one of the most challenging, but one of the most significant period in my career as a journalist, and also in my career in public affairs, because it affords you to see clearly what is right and what is wrong. Personally speaking, for myself, when I disagreed with what was being pushed down our throats by state authorities, I did not do something wrong. I just refused to do what they said. That was resistance. It was passive resistance. But I did not succumb to do something wrong. But I just resisted to do it and just did something right, if you like, instead of offending them. But I just continued to do something right. If the role of public media is to inform, is to educate, I concentrated on the values that it is informing and just kept away from probably a story that is directly planted on you to malign another individual. So instead of maligning that individual, I just changed the news diary, if you like. You went to the newsroom every day with 3 ideas. I just removed the ideas that would become narrow, personal, sectional, malicious, defamatory, and just put maybe a question of the fuel prices, something that will inform the public. It may be negative on government, but it will be saying the price of fuel is going up because of this factor and that factor. You remove personality. It was a difficult moment. That was a moment of heightened polarization. We began to look back and say, even during the one-party state, the Times of Zambia Daily Mail were not that bad.
Yeah.
There was some sense of professionalism. We dug deep and remembered Jeff Zulu, we remembered Mr. Marama himself, Hicks Kazwe, and other people. How did these people function?
Under a one-party state.
Under a one-party system, Dunstan, Kaman, and all that. And then we compared, it was a moment of shame when you look, now it's a plural a democracy, there's multiplicity of views, there's more technology. How did these old folks manage to stay professional? Those few names we are talking about, I'm mentioning, were some of the people that inspired confidence in retrospect in some of us. And I began to follow some of them and say, if they were able to achieve this, you can possibly, it is possible that you can possibly hold one view, which is fiercely independent and still be able to function. Maybe I can give myself as an example that some of the illusions, some of the perceptions you get is that the government literally breathes down everyone on the newsroom every day. It's not possible. How did I last 10 years in those? I'm not saying they were not doing that. They were. But then for you know, Emmanuel, that freedom is not given. You have to fight for it. I know there were those infractions, there were those disturbances, there were threats, sometimes real or imagined, but that change is effected by actors within a system. You can't change a system possibly from outside. You are more better positioned to change a system from within rather than from without.
The fourth estate, as the media is called in democracy, seems to have suffered regression. You know, the way we are worried about independence of the judiciary, independence and autonomy of parliament, and, you know, the excesses of the executive. The media, despite the flourishing presence of independent media, independent radio, and the advent of social media, public media remains, I think, in a state of concern. What is your perception about public media? Why hasn't it grown? If you were in the forefront, I think, of making those amendments to make ZNBC a public broadcaster, take away its licensing part, create IBA, and there was an attempt to make ZNBC public broadcaster where even its board and board members are ratified by parliament just to secure their tenure. But the conduct, for example, of ZNBC has continued to go down. What are your views about this, and how can, especially the public media, be relevant to our democracy?
In one word, the phenomenal changes that came with a very, very excellent program of action and advocacy that we put in with colleagues in the Media Institute of Southern Africa and other media institutions, the donor community that came to, in one word, the achievements that were based with those processes, regrettably, you can use one word and say it's been a stillbirth. There is absolutely nothing that stops ZNBC from functioning as a public broadcaster. Pretty much in the same way, the registration that governs the BBC, that governs SABC,
and others.
Some of the things some of the provisions we put in the IBA Act and ZNBC Amendment Act, some of them were more modern because they were an improvement on the practices that I'm talking about. So what prevents them from asserting themselves, projecting themselves as a public media is regrettable, because they have regressed back into state media. And what I can say about ZNBC is probably harsher than what I can say about the newspapers, because
they have no protection of legislation.
They have no protection of legislation. They are incorporated under Normal Companies Act. That's all that governs them, and another law that requires them to deposit the publications with the National Archives and all. But for ZNBC, they are governed by the ZNBC Act itself. They are incorporated under the Companies Act, first of all, as a body corporate. Then they are also governed, although to some extent they're excluded from the IBA, but they have this supportive regulatory mechanism that places them in a very strong position to be able to function as a public broadcaster. They've got some financial guarantees through the license, which newspapers don't have. They've got some of the most advanced equipment with the coming in of the Chinese. That Star Times project has got some of the equipment which is just at the leading edge of industry. So there's nothing that they cannot do in terms of content creations that the BBC does. So there's this stagnation. I see that from what I hear, even training and retraining no longer occurs because the budget that is there is just meant for salaries and a few things. It's a regrettable situation, but with the capacity building that has been put in there and a few training sessions that I'm aware of through Star Times, I think that they can do better.
They can do better as a public media.
Yes, and I think the clawback, the presence of the Minister of Information in the running of the affairs of ZNBC have come back again. Clearly, it's the Minister and the Permanent Secretary clearly calling the shots. I remember during the time of Dr. John Murida's as board chairman, ministers had to negotiate with him. Even if he refuses to remove the DG, that's what happened. Now, this is only a few years ago. This is under the same political environment, plural democracy. This is under the same act. So there are times when they say the greatest changes that have occurred in institutions, as I told you, sometimes have to be engineered by the character of the personality that they drop on.
That hold the office.
Or individuals.
And demand for those freedoms. No one will give it to them.
Yes, Dr. John Murida was a good friend of ours. Even us in government, we spoke to him with respect because if he said, I won't do it, that's it.
There was nothing you could do.
Then he left you with an option because the minister has power to remove the chairman of the board of ZNBC. But power itself is nothing if it is not used in moderation. I think his tenure of office came to an end by a fraction of time. But the impact that he left on the public broadcaster is that it was truly independent. So
and it is possible to be a public broadcaster.
It is possible for it to be a public broadcaster. I'm citing individuals because I can see myself through some of those actions that I tried very much to work under very difficult situation and condition within the public media and managed to help with colleagues to bring about phenomenal changes in the legislation that governed ZNBC, that governed newspapers, including the recently passed Freedom of Information Act. I think it's now access to
because you
freedom.
started it,
yes.
You, the media activists, Misa, yourself,
Yes.
Paza, and I think Fred Membe's organization,
Yes.
what was it called?
Press Freedom Committee
A
of the
Press
Post,
Freedom
the wing
Committee
of the Post.
Yes. Pioneered, those private bills that resulted in the ZNBC Act, IBA, and Freedom of Information. And only Freedom of Information bill failed. Yes. Because of... Speak briefly about your role as PASA Vice President and some of the work that you did.
Yes, essentially I was coordinating support from like-minded institutions in the foreign missions, donor communities, media think tanks abroad. That was my charge there. But of course, I was a de facto spokesperson. The president was based on the Copper Belt, so most of the heartbeat of the media was in Lusaka. So if ZNBC called for the program, I took that front row. I was a researcher, first of all, behind the scenes to look at the best practices that were occurring in the media landscape. We knew at that time, in the early 2001, that the future of the newspaper was clearly in decline. We began very actively to try and bring up technologies, advocate for technology and media practices that would create what we envisioned as an integrated newsroom, where we knew whatever happens, the front line of media communications would be the handheld mobile, either an iPad or the phone, because newspapers, as we know them, even now, if they do nothing about it, the newspaper can only die, because no one is going to wait to read the story that has occurred now in the
following day.
You read it almost instant. So we have begun to see a future well ahead of because we were media scholars ourselves, practitioners and activists, we began to put across those things and prepare for this future, where the newspaper is text, print, electronic, and now even radio and TV are threatened by the emergence of
social media, for example.
Social media is now an accepted form of media practice. The citizen journalist now, every individual can practice, which is why I always held a very controversial view that it is inappropriate in a democracy to try and legislate to define a professional journalist from one who is not. Because to practice as a journalist, all you need is to have information which is correct and project it through a media if you have a phone. Freedom to communicate ideas must not be restricted to degrees and other things, because then you are closing out space that is available for everybody. Of course, the newspaper...
I've seen some argument, with the rise of community and commercial radio stations, where, for example, authorities like government will speak with derision that DJs are hosting political programs. What do you expect? Impugning that there's no professionalism because maybe some of our, staff are not trained as journalists.
Yeah, some of the, I've forgotten the name, 2 or 3 top UK newspapers, some of the highest paid journalists there were not professional journalists.
Yeah.
But the skill, the accuracy with which they presented the information. What matters is that you have the medium that is operating within the law. What matters is that you have a platform and a guest to communicate ideas. The newspaper, the radio stations, for instance, are regulated by IBA. If they operate within the law, as established by the Independent Broadcasting Act, it doesn't matter who has host, but there are certain standards, in-house standards, that these radio stations and TV stations have to impose so that the practice, the interviews, don't offend against the ethos of journalism. Otherwise, my personal...
Is it a dying profession?
It wouldn't. If you were to ask me, as one US president said, if you were to ask me whether journalism must die or government, I would tell you I would rather government dies and journalism survives.
Yeah.
Journalism is a bastion of democracy. This is a platform that avails all citizens, the platform. I worry greatly at the falling standards in journalism. Yeah. I worry greatly at the exodus of skilled individuals away from the media to other high-paying professions. And therefore, when you say, is it a dying profession? To that extent, that some of the best and the brightest leave very quickly to pursue other things, or they get poached out of them. In that context, yes.
Yeah, because, some of the issues can be attributed, national issues, and how they are not tackled properly can be attributed to, sometimes lack of proper competences, understanding of the practice of journalism, where there's just he said, she said, and just talking heads. And the narrative, therefore, it drops tremendously down. And the nation is not allowed an opportunity to engage, for example, in a debate like ours.
It has, and to some extent, the indictment at the low-level debate that is going on in the country across many fields is essentially what you have said, the absence of qualified, experienced, and energetic journalists who can dissect this. For instance, I saw a story yesterday, I don't know, I haven't verified whether it's true. Bank of Zambia has put $50 million in the economy.
Yes, it is true, $50.3 million.
Yes, to try and revive the kwacha. In our time, we'll ask, in what form as the government, I know it's open market operations, in what form have they put that money in the economy? Is it lending to the commercial banks? Is it lending to agriculture? And if my mother in Chinsari, my grandmother in Petauke, if you say they've put, can you walk in Cairo Road and pick up $1 out of that?
So that monetary too must be explained to the people.
It must be explained. And
how it will support, for example, the foreign exchange market.
It is a duty of journalists. And again, when you try to blame government for this, what stops the journalists at the mast, diggers, and the Daily Mail from calling the governor or the spokesperson of the central bank $50 million, what is the distribution? How much of that is going to the mining sector? Have you reduced the statutory reserve ratios? In the first place, why did you mop it up only 2 months ago, only to put it back again? Then the public will be availed an opportunity to say the monetary policy is properly anchored on people who know what they are doing or not, or is there a proper interaction between fiscal and monetary policy? Because unless these two are interacting, then you are going to have these structural problems in the economy, and people are left. The newspaper, don't just get the daily rates and put them there. Explain why the kwacha today is 29, and last week, what is the cost in real value of an exchange rate that moves 7% in 2 weeks? What is the difference? Sometimes it means a company dying.
Yeah.
If Cobalt announces that they've made a discovery, the biggest in 100 years, you just dust up a report from NCCM and you see that those reserves were announced.
Yeah, yeah.
Much area. Then you ask them, are these additional resources to what you are talking about? Okay, if we didn't see them, okay, what is the size of this discovery? And if it's 1 billion tons, what is the real value of Zambia's worth 1 billion? We know the price of copper on the international market. So you can project if the mine is being built in 10 years. You can project the earnings of this government in the next 10 years, either from taxes, mineral royalties, then
and job creation.
What stops a journalist from writing an article and say, look, Minister Msogotwane, forget the debt restructuring in this manner, tell these people to suspend this and tell them that we will give you a bond when we have earned this amount in the next 15 years, we'll pay you, because the copper will not run away.
Yeah, yeah.
You see that? Yeah. Now, that kind of practice, you cannot say government is curtailing journalists from engaging in that kind of discourse. It's a corrective shame on all of us who are journalists that is not happening. But that does not stop the current generation of journalists from engaging in that. Because some of these things are simple issues. It's a controversial one, but I can tell you. How can a person pass through a border which is fully fledged with whole security services that he ran away? What happened? The journalist just reported that, no, the minister told us, we reported into Zimbabwe. And we also told
no one caused failure of institutions.
That's an institutional failure. Is this story adding up? Or is it just a fairy tale? Oh, so you can go to the border. How do you cross the border? Yeah. Oh, okay, what time did he arrive? So I'm passing no judgment on what is right, what is not right. I'm just using examples, high-profile examples, to explain the structural failure or intellectual resonance in the newsrooms today. That you can't just print a story like that. Because when you go there, at what point, if the immigration officer stops somebody from, clearly the gate will close to stop that person from. The distance between where he was, and clearly will tell you. So, if there was a proper journalist following up these reads properly, they would have uncovered the institutional failure that led to that incident. And also, on the human side, is this a sick man who is running away from political persecution? If it is true, what does the law say about a person running away from one jurisdiction and being brought back to that jurisdiction? Has the international law been broken? In my studies, when I was reporting very much on refugees and the law that governs people running away from an hostile environment, is that you cannot be returned to that jurisdiction.
To a place where you fear.
Yes. I'm not, again, passing any judgment, because this matter some of it is before the courts, some of it is within the hands of government. And again, there's a medical confidentiality around the Honorable Kambwiliso. But I'm saying, these are some of the failures. I'm saying this in order to explain when you say, is it a dying profession? Yes, in a sense, this critical approach to practice of journalism, even when things matter. We are in the midst of a very, very serious, potentially damaging drought at a time when the crop has reached a stage where if there's no fertilizer or water, it dies. What are the stock levels of maize from last year? How can you not project? You can project that the crop survey in the next 3 months will show this. Because we can tell from the weathermen law to, they've given a projection of the kind of rainfall pattern we'll receive in February. That is the height of the rain season. Low to below normal rainfall. So
that's a drought because your crop failure might be very high.
Yes, so the weather reporters told you, you can go and look at the maize yourself as a journalist. No one will come and put a shield and ask you not to film the fields that are grown. And then you can look at the FRA storage facilities. You can look at the policy of government in terms of exports, what are the barest minimum. Then you can look at the imports of meal and what is going out, and you can project. To do that is not to cause alarm, is to prepare both the policymakers and the population of an impending crisis that comes about.
And something that is literally missing from, I think, the media, investigative journalism. Yeah. It requires investment. It requires a prodding, a cadre of professionals to do that. The failure of lack of investigative journalists, impacts, for example, reporting on corruption and other malfeasance. Yeah. What should be done? It's like the media have abandoned, other than if they have a leakage document, they've literally abandoned investigative journalism.
Yes, and some of it, when we talk about investigative journalism, we make it look like it's a highly specialized branch of journalism. All it takes is to ask questions. When a statement is made, you ask questions. I am trying to steer away from matters that may say, oh, you are defending yourself in the media when you are before the courts of law. But maybe to exemplify what you are saying. Yeah. How can the spokesperson, for instance, of the lawfully established agents of government, like the SEC, for instance, I'm giving an example to try and answer the question you are giving. You go with a search warrant dated 16th August 2016, and you flash it on Amos Chanda and say, we are investigating you. No, I can't recognize this because it appears like it's out. No, we never acted on it, but it's still active. Oh, okay. Go in. And in a 3-bedroom house, the spokesperson of the Anti-Corruption Commission announces that in that 3-bedroom house, there was one room they were unable to enter. And the journalists print that story. Yeah. Come and ask Amos Chanda, which room is this which they failed to enter? Do you need investigative journalism to try and deal with malicious demonizing of a citizen? Look,
our journalists just take a microphone to the spokesperson and take it as gospel truth.
Yes.
The statements issued are never queried.
Yes.
They are never subjected, to interrogation to verify the weight of what is being said. In many cases, I find it as an abuse of the media because we clearly see this spokesperson is lying.
The media is available for that abuse. Yes. Assuming that were true, what does it tell you about the integrity and faith that citizens must have in the law enforcement agencies? That a suspect will just tell you that room don't enter and they back off. Are you going to go to bed thinking that you have a law enforcement agents that will protect
that can be told, don't go there and they obey.
How can you parrot crap like that as a media? Sorry to use that word. How can you do a thing like that? What is the distance between the Times of Zambia Daily Mail, the Mast, and between Odrands and where they, can we look at that room that intimidated 18 law enforcement agencies with 3 paramilitary officers? Now, if that matter goes ahead and be presented before court and you are prosecuted, what does it tell you about the integrity of the evidence gathered? What is a threshold for conviction in this country under English law, under Zambian law? Beyond reasonable doubt.
Yes.
You collected evidence from 3 rooms. In the 4th room you did not collect. Is the evidence you have before conclusive and credible? I'm using this example not to touch on anything.
That is in
As a matter of fact, there is no corruption case against me before any court. There is a local court matter of an insult nature That's it.
Yeah.
And again, what stops the discourse? For instance, the ACC also prosecutes insults.
Yeah.
What is a mandate of
We
its
expect the
institution?
media, in that case, I questioned this. When did the SEC become an institution that prosecutes insults?
No, I didn't want to use examples of other colleagues. So this is only as far as to demonstrate to you and acquit government in some ways that some of the failures of the media is not due to the heavy hand of government. It's the abuse that they have called upon themselves, and you can literally plant anything, and it goes.
Let's go to the high-profile case. When people learn that Amos Chanda is on the podcast conversation, they want some things that they've heard. They want to learn from you. I remember when I think Zambia, the Vice President, Honorable George Kunda, you were, I think, as a vice president, controversial. I think you were parting ways, I think, with the Daily Mail, because your profile was rising in speaking for journalists and speaking for principles of journalism would put you in the fire line with government.
Yes.
And then you worked with George Kunda, the vice president. A man I love, I used to say, he spoke in capital letters, in the manner he spoke. So you had that controversial relationship. I think we're going under a peer review mechanism as a country, and you roped in your professional.
Yes.
You were from the flank and associated with the PF, and then you were thrust into the office of the vice president. Just speak to that and the misunderstanding that arose.
In fact, when I was parting company with the Daily Mail, I took official leave. I was still a member of staff of the Zambia Daily Mail. Then I went to law school. Then I was on leave. So the agreement with the Daily Mail is that some of the weekends I was going to work and some of the days when I'm not in university, I would appear. So I was actually a staff member of the Zambia Daily Mail, and then seconded to the Africa Peer Review Mechanism Secretariat under the Minister of Justice. At the same time, the Minister of Justice was also Vice President of the country. So effectively, I was in the office of the Vice President, George Kunda. So when he called upon me himself and interviewed me himself, he said, the skill we are looking for is actually like you were put on earth to do this kind of job we want to give you. We want you to be a researcher and spokesperson of the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, and from time to time, you will be working in Gracia Machel's office in Midrand, South Africa. So exactly who you are is a person we are looking for. I said, oh, okay, how do I? Then there were suggestions that for me to function properly, they must formally appoint me as private secretary in his office. There was a pushback and a backlash. He said, no, regimented under the civil service, you'll be constrained. So let's put him within the National Governing Council, Africa Peer Review Mechanism, including a salary was put up, a 4x4 vehicle, everything, an office was set up. Then the following day, he called me again and said, I have a second interview, but the first thing is the security reporters come, political reporters come, they are telling me,
your opposition,
you are sat as person, but before you answer, I told them that I know. That was Vice President George Kunda.
Wow.
But he said the kind of quality and skill we are looking for is exactly
available with you.
Whether during his spare time you will continue to work for opposition leader Michael Sata.
So when you hear these stories where professionals have been removed because they're associated with the PF or they were appointed by the PF, where a large number of officers are packed at Public Service Management Division, PSMD, what comes to mind? Because you went through a process where you are deemed as an opposition, yet you are given such a high level position at the office of the Vice President. That can't happen now.
It can't happen, and it's regret. What suffers is government, because there's no substitute to institutional memory. I'll tell you, and I'll come back to this by giving you an example from my experience in England. When I lived in England, I was a member of the Labour Party. As a diplomat, Zambian diplomat, they had a Commonwealth statutes.
You were a member of the Labour Party.
And I even voted in West London. And I was an activist in the Labour Party in England. The British government did not raise any issue that the foreign diplomat...
That you are being partisan.
You see that? So some of these narrow, petty things we put in there, Now, that is one example. When the opinion, the point I was making is that the opinion polls showed that Eddie Miliband was becoming prime minister because he opened the opinion poll bid that had only occurred only once in the history of the United Kingdom. The secretary to the cabinet under David Cameron went to see him and tell him that, sir, I have to attach some of the civil servants to Labour Party HQ because the Labour leader might just become prime minister.
Wow.
And I have to invite some of the intellectuals and advisors to Eddie Miliband,
the opposition
to
leader,
be reporting to cabinet office to familiarize themselves with government in case they form government. The right honourable Prime Minister authorized the secretary to the cabinet to attach civil servants.
That is profound, because in this country, the opposition is deemed as an enemy, as a saboteur. In fact, that's a reason they are using to purge people from service and public service that are associated with the opposition, and therefore they could be undermining government. Is that a correct understanding of a civil servant?
It is not. How can a serving civil servant, PS director, actively undermine government? It will be known. If he does that at 10:45, by 10:46 it will be known. You cannot. Let us assume that the turnover of government will be after President HH, it's President Kalaba, it's President Membe. When are you going to find civil servants that will run government? Because if the current crop of civil servants, hypothetically, President Kalaba took office as president, he removed all of them and brought in DP-aligned civil servants. One term, and let's assume an eventuality occurs, President Fred Membe comes within 2 years. What sort of turnover? How many people? There is just...
You'll have destroyed the public service.
How long does it take to train a civil servant of my stage? How long does it take to train even those proper, we were special civil servants code from the private sector and politics? They are those who have just spent their entire lives being trained as civil servants. How many can you train in one term of 5 years?
That's why the example you've given, where Secretary to Cabinet is the one even informing the Prime Minister that I want some members from the opposition, because you might lose your job, Mr. Prime Minister, but I will need to run government and even align it to the policies
and
of the new
the manifesto. And why do you say, the opinion polls Prime Minister are like this, and this is the Labour? We don't want a dislocation. If Labour comes, they are trying to privatize the NH sector. They are trying to nationalize it. Eddie Miliband said it will break up the monopolies of the energy sector. We can't have people dying because they have to choose between heating and heating. If there is no central heating system, as you know, in England, you die. He said, I can't have citizens choosing between food and gas. We will break up his monopolies. He made a policy statement. The energy industry was in shock. The Secretary to the Cabinet says, I have to look at that policy. If he becomes Prime Minister, so we don't want a dislocation. He says the railway system will nationalize it, because you can't have a mother choosing whether they must buy milk in order to improve the immunity and breastfeed, or whether they should get on the train, because he was thinking that big business was abusing its monopoly. So those statements, unfortunately, increased these poor ratings. So the Secretary to the Cabinet then was justified to tell the Prime Minister that these statements he's making are finding gravitas within the population, and he has 18 points ahead of you. So the people who run government are those special advisors around him. So I must begin to talk to them so that they can transition between politicking and running government. When they come, I don't want them to come and do some of the things.
Torpedo.
And it was phenomenal. That is a reference point I use. And it never happened. I was a
and that's a damage to the politicization of our civil service. And our people don't understand the damage that is being done. That is very lasting.
At our level, even if, as you know, I resigned in 2019, I wasn't in government when PF was losing power. Look, I would have resigned on election night if I was in government and I saw the numbers that Mr. H. I would have left. I was a political civil servant. I would have gone to him in the morning and requested him that I would go. But I don't accept that the director in the Ministry of Energy must
should
be
also
treated
be treated. No, totally
very
different.
Far away from the active politics that political civil servants like me would get in. I cannot accept that an executive officer can be subjected to that political scrutiny. What kind of government are we going to have?
No, we're destroying the public service.
Public service being
The next matter I want you to discuss is when you are in the office of newly elected President Michael Sata. He wins. It was a surprise win especially by pundits and diplomats. Rupiah Banda was doing very well. The economy, was foreign reserves at $4.5 billion. The price of milli meal, the price of things were quite cheap. And Michael Sata comes. He comes rampaging, I think, with this message against the Chinese and against corruption. Grouping Rupiah Banda and his children to a corrupt lot. So despite the economy doing very well, despite the ratings being very well, foreign reserves at the highest probably in the last 20 years, Rupiah Banda loses election, and you have a surprise president in Michael Sata. Speak to that, because you are in the presidency in 2011 when President Michael Sata becomes president.
He had appointed me, and he was using the terminology, he says you are the deputy press secretary. He rarely used these terms as special assistant. He was very British, as you know, in terms of orientation. But basically, during his time in opposition, I was one of his strategists, hidden away in Winter Kavimba's office. And because I was a law student there, I was disguised as an intern at Honorable Winter Kavimba's office. And I was a principal advisor to Mr. Kavimba, Secretary General of the PF. But essentially, whatever I was doing there was for the benefit of President Michael Sata. So I was a police advisor in his days as opposition. But he said, for the same reasons we are talking about, I have just come from the office of the Vice President, George Kunda, and I'm a key advisor to the main opposition leader seeking to get state power in there. This paranoia, conspiracy theories, we exaggerate them. That is not to say a Vice President, George Kunda, was Vice President to Rupiah Banda. This is not to say that they didn't know who I was. But President Sata, we have to protect you so that they don't see that you are directly advising me. So we get into government, and I was in his office for 11 months before he sent me to the United Kingdom. So people are fearing, the markets are in turmoil, very turbulent, the governance institutions, the British High Commission is calling, everyone is afraid of this supposedly high-handed president. He's gone to chase the Chinese. We knew ourselves who were close to him that he would not. That's why his first day in office, the first ambassador he met was a Chinese ambassador. Within days, maybe 5 days, there was a big luncheon in a white tent in the grounds of State House. And it simply dissolved away the tensions that were building. We knew the numbers clearly from forming government. We knew the numbers that had crossed through Chirundu border into Zimbabwe, Chinese nationals, because they feared. He simply said, my Chinese are different from Rupiah Banda's Chinese president. Within 1 week, some of the highest paid companies, because his problem with Chinese was low wages, poor working conditions, no environmental justice, some of the best paying companies were Chinese companies. So we achieved all that. That was the kind of president that he was, very practical, very pragmatic, and you would see the situation for what it is, and he took a decision on the basis of that. So
now, speak to that briefly. For political analysts and watchers of history, that's very surprising. Just a few months before, Michael Sata goes to a national conference, to a convention, and he's deemed as a West candidate, actually, belonging to the Western world, because the delegates that are at that conference show you, and his rhetoric over the years against the Chinese have clamored and they've gone round Rupiah Banda. So Rupiah Banda is actually seen as an Eastern candidate, while Michael Sata is seen as a Western candidate. And look, within a short period when he becomes president, that he has actually migrated already to the East, Michael Sata.
That is a pragmatic policy that he had, and the ability to organize talent around him and reasoning across purposes, and the ability to separate personal issues from professional issues. He would sit and ask, what does this mean? Oh, Mr. President, your statements must be moderate. No, I promise the people of Chinsari this. I know the corners of this, the ring Zambia. He will tell you the global picture, his universal picture of things. Then, okay, what do you want to do here? Okay, there's no such a thing as a bad Chinese. It's a policy of government. There's no such a thing. There's no way the Chinese ambassador can dictate policy here. In the same way that the British ambassador or High Commissioner, the American ambassador can do this. Then he says, we are going to choose our own friends. The first policy is that all embassies are our friends. But we are not going to be invited to enmity of Sweden and Russia and we join in. We will deal with the Russians as our friends. In the same manner, we'll deal with Sweden as our friend. So he was not dogmatic. He was not regimented. He was a pragmatic. His foreign policy was pragmatic. When he met with the Chinese, and I'll tell you this, now I'm with President Lungu, and I'm in the room with him and President Xi Jinping. And President Xi Jinping says one of his lasting memories of his presidency, no matter how long he stays, was that of Michael Sata, because that was the first foreign president he met when he assumed power as president.
That's a nugget.
And he says, I have never seen practical gentlemen like him. I am so sad up to now. Let me formally again deliver my message.
So this is President Xi Jinping.
Xi Jinping telling President.
That's 2017, 2018.
2016. 2015, actually. When
2015.
President Lungu was one election,
yes.
It was the fastest diplomatic clearances, I think, if you have studied diplomacy. It's sworn in on January 20. I think within 3 months of that, a state visit, high level, is granted in Beijing.
Yeah.
And then there's 4 people, 5 actually in the room. The 2 presidents, Winichiwe Sakunda, our ambassador, and myself in there. And the first thing he makes is how sad he was at that present time.
Because he had met President Michael Sata.
Yes, that was the first president he met.
When he came into office, I think in 2013.
Yes, yes. So he says, this is how I remember him, and he was a perfect gentleman. Tough, very abrasive outlook, but very weak at heart. This is a man. This exactly is who Michael Sata was. So you are learning some of these things. And then he says to them, and he was an honest man because he told me that he lived in England and is great friends with the British. But he says, President, I'll deal with you as President of China. How I deal with the British is not your problem. Your investments, your people. This I did not hear from Michael Sata. I heard it from President Xi telling President Lungu. See that? So when you make assumptions about how policy is done, it's again, for instance, let's assume you got Winichiwe Sakunda, who was our ambassador then. I'm going back to the subject we have settled. And throw her away as being so high up during the reign of the PF. If I'm not there, I'm telling you that in that room there was Winnie and myself. Who would have that institutional memory?
No one.
You see that?
And you just treat and then remove them.
For any reasons, I'm happy that she's ambassador elsewhere. So this is how government must run. There must be continuity, and we must avoid politicization of civil service. So going back to the reign of President Michael Sata, that was a time when I went into government. There was that part of history that many people don't know. Because I'm in a very high-profile position under President.
So he balanced his interests, both the East interest and the West, and he kept them together for the benefit of our country.
Yes, and if I must review how he sent me to England, he says, but I also want you to go and study the ways of the British. If you have to deal with them, you must study their ways. He had sent me there in order for him to recall me back in his office after some time. He picked up his phone himself and called the British High Commission. I'm sending one of my best boys to England, and that visa was given express. And the British High Commissioner called me. This is the first time in my career. I can't deal with this. The president called me and said, you must personally come. And look, not that we would refuse, but I want all your children, a wife, we want to process this. The president called me. This is a very pragmatic person. So he balanced the interests of East and West. He also balanced the interests of inner workings of cabinet and other interests.
Your very public profile is with President Edgar Lungu because you are a spokesperson, and I think you last a spokesperson for quite a significant time.
Yeah.
You are highly perishable commodities as spokesperson, but I think you were there from 2015 to 2019.
Yes.
What are your reflections?
My reflections...
Is a spokesperson just a spokesperson?
No.
What did you see? What did you find? Are you just a clerical officer issuing statement for the president? What was your role and in the ecosystem of government?
In the ecosystem of government, the simplification of the role of the spokesperson in government, in companies, is exactly what makes the media not understand the implications of the stories they do and why they missaid it. Before a statement is issued, what goes into that statement must first of all be researched by yourself. There are other researchers behind you, in front of you, but ultimately, the content, the output that comes in the name of the president is essentially on your head. If it goes wrong, it's you. You can't say the president told me, because before he says something. So when you are there, you are like a football coach. You are only loved when the team has won. There are many things that you do, and you are not thanked for preventing crises. You prevent more crises than the statements you make. But you are not thanked for that job because no one ever saw maybe a direct clash between two sovereign countries. As a spokesperson, sometimes you stand in between, Mr. President, unless you do this. There will be hostile relations between this country and that country. But how do you become the front line? Because, for instance, it is still classified, but I was senior enough to know what can offend state security and what cannot. The president is incommunicado because he's in some area where he cannot be reached. The Director General of Intelligence, for some reason, cannot be reached. The minister who had traveled with the president cannot be reached. And the American ambassador calls now and says, you are the last line we must speak to before we take a very drastic action. But Zambia is such a friendly country, we don't want to violate the airspace. But it is so essential that some of our people who are not civilians may have to enter Zambian airspace in order to protect not just the American interests, but Zambian interests. And they had to enter to take away terrorists who were within hours of striking Zambian facilities to punish us, one, for Zambia's declaration as a Christian nation. Two,
so there is a potential terrorism act.
Yes.
There is a potential terrorism issue that
yes.
is about to occur.
Yes.
And the Americans have been investigating and tracking this matter.
Yes.
And they need to act.
Yes.
And sometimes
they need the permission.
The authorities and permissions required are so bureaucratic. That it might escape action. And
yes.
But they need to do it.
They need to do it. And these people which I will not name, they're about to blow up 2 heavily populated centers. And the Americans have seen them and they said, we can act, but the special SEALs who are about to execute this are outside the Zambian borders, and this is how long it will take them. And I'm trying to explain the role of the spokesperson. You are the person with that information. And they have told you this information, Washington says, only the president must know. That's the closest we can get to the president.
So we had in this country where they came, extracted the individual and left.
And the president was informed afterwards. I took a guess.
So you acted on behalf of the president, violating other authorities?
Yes, I did not, because the American ambassador told me not to name. If you can't get to the president, keep it to yourself.
Wow.
But because we are friendly, so this is a friendly country and we don't want to hostile action within Zambian airspace.
Yeah.
It is just for the fact that we spoke.
For your information.
Yes, we spoke to one high-profile citizen around, in case we act without express permission. I took the risk. I had to reach Zambia Air Force Command and tell him. Yes. And they acted, and they extracted those people. Not a single bullet was fired. They were airborne, and we managed to tell the president this has happened. I was told what has happened can only mean two things.
Yeah.
Either you'll be thanked or you'll be sacked.
Yeah.
You see that? The president thanked me
Yeah.
on the phone and said that was essential, because to follow procedure and lose life, or to get these people, malicious people, accusing you of having abused presidential power, I would rather you abuse it and you save life. What you did was excellent. So, is that the role of the spokesperson?
No, totally not.
What would you do?
The power you are wielding there, you're not spokesperson.
You see that. But you need
the influence.
The judgment call you needed to make. When I sometimes speak loosely and say, sometimes I was in a position to decide between life and death. Those are the situations I'm referring to. But as you can see, it's a heavily redacted testimony I'm giving you.
Yeah.
Again, the same similar incident repeats itself. The president is on holiday. He insists I should travel with him. I was aware of the many public statements, a public sentiment that was injuring the kwacha and other things. They struck, the fundamentals for the economy were in place. The negative sentiment was battering the kwacha. Then I said, either the president himself must be in Lusaka, or one of the persons who speaks, and they will take it that the president has spoken. So I remain, and the president is incommunicado in Eastern Province, and there's a crippling dispute between KCM on one side and CEC. There's a crippling difference between Mopani and CEC is cutting power to two most important mines. 10,000 workers' jobs are on there's a threat of a riot in Florida. And then I call CEC and I call Mopani and say, what's the problem here? Then, to my memory, the problem could be solved. You can see that. Unfortunately, Minister Mutati was Minister of Finance. He can attest to this. Minister Mutati and myself, we imposed a settlement between Mopani and CEC, and power was, and 10,000 jobs were saved. And I call a press conference at Twangale and say, look, there are certain things that are not going right in this and this. I think when there is this dispute, I guess the president...
That particular incident, I think, for me, typifies the role of the spokesperson.
Yes.
When do you speak? When do you let other authorities speak? When does chief government spokesperson speak? When do, for example, in this case, maybe ZESCO should have spoken. When does the spokesperson speak?
When the spokesperson speaks, it's a judgment call. You must know that the damage, for instance, there are a few things where presidential power must be invoked directly by him or by his aides or special people. I was very close to the president and with him several times that I could get into his head and know what is in there. So I would judge that if he was in Lusaka, this is what he would say. Again, he called through a businessman that had accompanied him for that holiday to say, that is excellent job you are doing. You have saved jobs and all that. So tomorrow, he added now, he dictated what to add to what I had said. So it's a judgment call. There is no university that will tell you when to speak, when not to. It is evaluating the market, for instance. People don't understand. They underrate the Zambian financial market. They react to public sentiment. Now, when do you speak? When you have the evidence and it tells you you must do this. For instance, when I was intervening and clearly saying that there was manipulation in the market, it was because 16 bank treasurers had summoned them to what is wrong with this. And they told me there was nothing wrong. The fundamentals in the market are okay. What is the problem? They said there is speculation and deliberate sabotage. Then I go and say, okay, there will be an intervention because the structural weaknesses of the economy, which were being given as a reason for this, is actually not. I did not say I spoke to bank treasurers, but I was on Terra Firma, I was on firm ground. How would 16 treasurers of banks lie to me? So what should happen? Oh, it's this.
So the criticism there is Amos is speaking on everything and anything.
Yes.
He's now an energy expert.
Yes.
He's now speaking on foreign exchange.
Yes.
He's now speaking on food security.
Yes.
He's presidential spokesperson. Explain that.
I have been advised, look, what better financial market intelligence or advice can you get better than one coming from 16 different banks in one room? So what the public does not see is that when I'm speaking like that, I am limiting myself within the confines of the professional advice I have received from the market. For instance, when this kwacha depreciation again came, and the problem and the sabotage that the bank treasurers told me was not the reason. This time I consulted within the market, I consulted within the energy market. They said, no, forget the banks, forget the opposition who are being accused. Look, Minister of Energy and Minister of Agriculture in 1 week went into the market and mopped out the dollar.
Or to buy
Government
fertilizer
agencies.
and to pay for example, for power, maybe Zesco.
Yes. The idea is that these two big market players should not go into the market
at the same time.
There is look, we've told President Kikwete to avail us access to the ship to dock quickly so that we can have a 2-week delay before we pay the bills for that. What does this mean? Gravazio is asking me. Gravazio, it means to us that there will be $46 million in the economy as I speak. When, as I speak, that $46 million, which was mopped out inadvertently, will go back in the market. The kwacha was gaining whilst I was on the podium. It's because I had received advice, including from Christopher Mvunga, who was the Deputy Secretary to the Cabinet Fed at that time. So when the spokesperson
in fact, that brings us to issues of statecraft. People may not understand. That example you've given is very apt. I looked at Zesco paying independent power producers. Just last week they released that they've brought down the bill from, is it $1.7 billion to somewhere around, I think, $1.1 billion. It shows that they've paid up to, in the last 2-3 months, they've paid up to maybe $700 million. They will not pay in kwacha. They'll pay in US dollars. And maybe, the bills at Ministry of Agriculture have also matured, and you need to pay maybe for the fertilizer that you got. So the market is under pressure. And if someone doesn't analyze and present the facts, we may not understand the crisis we have, for example, in the foreign exchange market. Let us move away. I want you to evaluate the presidents we've had. We've had 7 presidents. And I want your opinion on all of them, especially from the perspective of national development, the character they brought to the presidency, what they did good, what could have been their greatest achievement and greatest mistakes. Maybe your reflections. Let's start with Dr. Kenneth David Kaunda.
The most important thing, first of all, I was not born when he was leading the freedom struggle, but of course, some of the most comprehensive literature about any president this far is about Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, because he himself put his thoughts in writing.
He would write.
His vision was very clear. His papers were well thought through. His pronouncements, whether it's humanism, whether it's a human-centered society. Look, I did not agree with, my views, political ideology of Dr. Kaunda, but I admired the clarity of his thoughts. He put it in writing. So if you were to evaluate Dr. Kaunda's greatest achievement is national unity. First of all, he led us into the independence struggle together with his friend Simon Mansaka-Pwepo and others. National unity and also the success of structured national development plans. Those 5-year plans were phenomenal. You can't develop without national development planning. If you read Xi Jinping's book, The Governance of China, it's about national planning. And he himself, if a guy will stand for 9 hours and deliver a speech non-stop, it is in his head.
When I look at those speeches back then of Fidel Castro and Julius Nyerere, Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, they could be on a podium for 8 hours.
8 hours.
Oh my. And a captivating audience.
Yes, and drinking water. And that tells you that they thought about what they wanted to do. I want to be president, and this is a vision, of course embellished with education in between there. But it tells you they are speaking from their heart. So Dr. Kaunda is a clarity of vision, clarity of thought, what he believed in. He wanted, Mr. Sata had to capture some of the thoughts of Dr. Kaunda. Yeah. He wanted every 20 kilometers a school and a hospital. You saw it when he put the cashew nut factory there. Yeah. He puts a police training in Chinsari. He puts the power stations here. You can see it was
how to build a nation.
How to build a nation. And Mr. Sata turns it around through declaration of districts, which some people mocked. Western province is a totally different. I'm evaluating Dr. Kaunda by using some of the examples later in the Sata president. So national unity, national development planning. He held this country together through the One Zambia, One Nation motto. It was not a simple, he was able, almost successfully, destroying these ethnic boundaries that so sadly have resurfaced. That a professional like me will be judged whether I'm Chanda or Chundo, Mwamba or That is where Dr. Kaunda is standing in his grave. This must come to an end. He sent you as permanent secretary to Western Province if you are a Northern. He sent you to Southern Province maybe if you are an Easterner. He got Alexander Chikwanda, the late Uncle Alexander Chikwanda, spoke fluent Valley because he was a governor in Zambezi. He will tell you about the cashew nut factory, the pineapples, and the mannerisms of when Alexander Chikwanda is in front of the Ruvales and they saw him as what can be better than that. So that was the
so national building
policy.
Is deliberate.
It's deliberate.
Achieving
it's
unity
deliberate.
Is a deliberate government.
If there is one, two functions of the president is nation building, nation unit. Full stop. The others are subsidiary, of course, to protect private life and property. Nation building is deliberate, and you have to take steps, and they must be embedded in your actions, not just by mouth, in the policies you give. And when you look at some of his failures, is to try and cure some of the fears he had about the potential for disintegration, tribalism, ethnic tension, senseless judgment of one person. You want to punish, I said this on TV one time, and I'll repeat, I'm avoiding using another person's example. I'll give an example.
Your own example.
It was a controversial statement live on TV that I'm not cooperating with the SEC because I'm being investigated because I'm from Chinsari and not Choma. I still retain that because one tribalist told me when government has changed and there's no Bemba DG at the SEC will come after you. And it began to happen. How can I not talk about it? Now, the point I'm making is that don't punish Mr. X from Choma because the president in office today is from Chinsari. Or don't punish Simumba from Nakonde because the president in office is from Western Province. That cannot happen. That cannot be tolerated. We are one Zambia, one nation, one KK belt. We are destroying actively with more technology, more information, more power to communicate messages of national building. We are using them to put this country apart.
Asunder.
Yes.
What could have been the weaknesses of Dr. Kaunda?
His weaknesses is the shrinking of the civil society space and then the enlargement of the state. Any country where civil society is smaller than the state is bound to collapse because when you get the state to expand beyond the civil society, and when I speak about civil society, we're talking about the private sector, NGOs, the sum total of non-state actors. The society was being crushed from above. So when you are
the declaration of one party state
was a fundamental monumental mistake. He could have dealt with it. He was trying to cure tribalism and some elements of infected freedom. some freedoms create some infections and created aberrations on his grand scheme of national unity. But I always state this, and I'll repeat, the cure for disease freedom is more freedom rather than restriction. He should have allowed more spaces, breathing spaces. People should be able to vent their frustration. Then this would have created a more vibrant society that knows that they can vent their anger, or they can form their own parties.
In fact, he was a beneficiary of a multi-party state himself. When he becomes prime minister in 1963,
yes, and,
we know we go to elections. 1964, he becomes president. We are a thriving multi-party state with private sector participation almost at 80%.
Yes, one of the most successful private sector periods in this country was during that time. One of the evidence of the fruits of democracy is Dr. Kaunda himself, because he was never universally elected. He led UNIP with a majority. It combines its electoral success with ANC, and he becomes president. There was no vote cast on Dr. Kaunda himself as president. So now, why am I talking about this Chinsarian making a coalition with the Southern and they form government? How can you say that 58 years later, that the Southern and the Northern cannot? What kind of
when our forefathers demonstrated
yes,
that in the interest of our country?
So his greatest mistake was actually to reduce that platform, democratic space, shrink civil society, create a larger-than-life state. You know, as citizens, you must be able, it should be possible for Emmanuel to go through life without having to have interactions with law enforcement agencies. We must interact with the state. It needs evidence of clinics, hospitals, post office. You can't have police stations, courtrooms, and criminal law firms busier than farms and factories, and they think that you can develop. No. There should be a moment when the police must come and say, Mr. Chanda, we want to search your house in a much more surgical manner. They can even say, we just want to search 3 rooms where we think there is evidence of corruption or criminality. And they must be able to say, okay, sit down, let me understand, my lawyer is coming, we can even have tea, and they can search, and I must shake their hands and go. That is the presence of the state in our lives. But if the presence of the state crowds out you from private sector participation, it is oppressive, you think it's malicious, you think it's ethnic-based. When citizens begin to fail to cooperate with law enforcement agencies, you have a dysfunctional society. I think Dr. Kaunda's state grew bigger than it was. Otherwise, he was an excellent president.
Second president, Frederick Chiluba, comes. I think we have national economic crisis and the oppressive nature of the state, like you said. Human rights issues are under question, and a long-standing trade unionist and voice for the people. Then his eventual winner in 1991, he becomes president. Just your reflections on Dr. Chiluba and his presidency.
Dr. Chiluba, with his many years in the trade union, his convictions under the tutelage of Simon Mwansaka Pwepwe, he understands where these 2 men wanted to take the country. He cannot stand the oppression. As a trade unionist is a libertarian in thinking, so human freedom, success, private enterprise are in there. So he rides on the crest of dissent, which Kaunda created for himself with a phenomenal 76, 77 majority. He wins the presidency. He undertakes one of the most robust reform programs you can ever think of, not just in Africa, worldwide. He wants to restructure the economy. He takes severe cuts. He ends subsidies, and he tries to reform the entire one-party state machinery. Those were
to make it democratic.
Those were challenging moments. And he was phenomenally successful until he was clouded by this image of a return of Dr. Kaunda, who some of us who had begun now to speak to people around him would say, actually, if Dr. Kaunda ran, he would lose. But I don't know what is in that office that makes presidents paranoid. He was asked a question in Kenya. He says, the interviewer was opinionated. Under what circumstances President Chiluba would you succumb to public pressure? He says, as a Democrat, under all circumstances. But Dr. Kaunda actually, there's public pressure that he stands, but I think he can't win. Dr. Chiluba retorts, suppose he wins. So you see, so it's this fear that drives him to focus on Dr. Kaunda and begin to calculate, engineer the outcome of 1996 election to
constitution and
Dr.
election.
It takes a lot of energy away from him. It creates a split. The young Turks can't agree. This is not a program we agreed with you, Dr. Chiluba. The old school, Arthur Wiener and others go away. The young Turks, Bodwin Nkumbula, Churu Karima, Dean Mungomba, and all those things. So they begin to weaken the MMD. So he had assembled one of the most talented cabinets you can ever think of.
Yes.
And the hemorrhage began because of
those political fears and political action.
They were power struggles, very healthy power struggles, intellectual, ideological contestation between Ronald Penza on one side, the Young Turks on the other, the Emmanuel Kasondes, the Unipis, there was Michael. That kind of energy that came into the room was healthy for a healthy democracy. But I think that his fixation on Dr. Kaunda, from my judgment, as you know, my familiarization with State House began during the Chiluba time. Because at a very young age, as a young reporter, I was attached to the Hope Foundation, to the wife of the president.
The former First Lady, yes.
Those who try to demean me when I'm here, look, I would drink tea in State House as a young reporter, 1 year on the job.
Yeah.
The power corridors in State House had no effect on me. I got familiar with that environment very early in my career. So I'm bringing in this because you're asking me to evaluate Dr. Chiluba.
Yeah.
And you would ask,
what were his weaknesses?
His weaknesses mainly was that he was paranoid about the possible return of UNIP. He began to be captured by a few people that would just tell him, we have enemies, this. And he succumbed to that, and he began to work towards destroying the opposition. It's a very dangerous enterprise. To sit down and deliberately calculate to destroy the opposition is a very dangerous, short-sighted, self-defeating act. I think that I saw my brother Mwanawasa and Banda here to be accused of treason, the intellectual, the cream de la cream of that time, because he's writing speeches for Dr. Kaunda. You saw it ended in disaster. So he had begun to try and destroy, and we are seeing some of those actions. Now, it is extremely dangerous.
Levi Mwanawasa, I think through some mistakes of President Chiluba and the third term attempt.
Yes.
And like you are tracing from 1996, he's weakened.
Yes.
And he chooses a success at the last minute. So Mwanawasa comes as a minority president with a very, very razor-thin win.
Yeah.
And what's your reflection of Mwanawasa? He begins to be our president, I think, for the next 7 years. He wins the second term, but he dies in office, in 2008.
I'll start with his weaknesses, which is basically not the weaknesses of the person himself. It appears it runs through every president. There's a shadowy group which I can't put a finger on that creates paranoia in presidents, and they get hold of them. So they created fear in this president that the member group had risen against you and they would destroy your presidency. Some of the best men in his cabinet were Bemba. Levi Mwanawasa himself essentially saw himself as Bemba. When you are with him, he spoke more Bemba than anything.
And he grew up and fraternized from the Copper Belt.
So they planted this fear in him, and he begins to try and recreate. For him, it was actually dangerous because he succeeded on the same party. But he wanted to recreate the entire infrastructure of Dr. Chiluba, uproot it, and impose his own. So within there were structural problems. Without any problem. He was a decisive leader. If I go to his strength, he was very fair-minded. And I'll use my example again. In my days as the president of the Press Association, and being critical of government, he called Darrington Mwape and Sunday Nkonde, Justice Sunday Nkonde, now retired, when he was Solicitor General and Darrington was legal advisor. I don't agree with what, you is PF, but is what he's saying correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he called for me, and I don't agree with this and this. And what should the media policy be like? And Darrington Sunday Nkonde can agree. Now he was telling us to listen to what you are saying. So I'll come to the office before you go to the television. So this was a fair-minded president. He told them, I'm president. I know who is PF and who is MMD. I am saying what he was saying on TV yesterday. Is it correct? You see? So his strength was that ability as president to act fairly. They didn't call him president, commander-in-chief. They called him lawyer-in-chief because he wants, what is your opinion? What evidence do you have? And I think presidents must be like that because the amount of power you wield there is so much that you must avoid rumor mongers bringing things to you to cause, bring into judgment other people that you have not heard. His problem, I think, that there were a few people that thought that they were ethnically closer to him, so they must have more cake than others. And so they alienated him from the Bemba group, and he began to see some ethnic threats. But I think he was able to rise about that.
Rupiah Banda, short presidents, 3 years.
Yes. Rupiah Banda's problem, first of all, his strength is this ability to rise above pettiness. The metaphorical reference to the president as a father of the nation fits very well with Arabi, in the shoes of President Rupiah Banda. Very sober, very stately. Some of his successes was just his character as president. The markets were at ease with him.
Yeah, they were calm.
They thought he wouldn't make an irrational decision, and clearly he wouldn't. He was able to talk to everyone. That is good for national unity. That is good for the financial market. He was able to allow ministers to function, and therein lies his weakness because he over-allowed these ministers to do certain things for which he got beaten. The economy was rising. We had an IMF program. The entire period of President Rupiah Banda, we had an IMF program. That's why some of us who are inclined to Western liberal thinking, we are not dogmatic. It's because we have seen it work. It's how the president in office decides what to do and what not to do. So it's not essentially a black and white thing, East and West. It's President Rupiah Banda's, we had an IMF program. We did not see some of the effects that we see in the IMF programs. And so he was able to, his title as president for all Zambians, I think, fitted very well. He was able to preside over it. But he had a much more superior PR opponent in Michael Sata. And I think that...
No, Michael Sata was incomparable, was a media machinery unto himself.
And the people in Mr. Sata's team, visible and invisible, were bigger and greater and much more skilled and faster than the PR machine of President Banda. Of course, there's a burden of incumbency. We could do a lot of things that our colleagues in government couldn't do. Our media machinery clearly overran the media machinery of President Banda. That was his weakness. And people believed in our message. We sought to, and then actually the fatigue of the MMD, he got beaten for it. He was the one that took it into the 20th year, and people had begun to demand more freedoms. Otherwise, it was a fantastic old man.
Yeah, you described somehow Mr. Sata earlier, but notable like Mwanawasa, he lifted the immunity of Rupiah Banda.
Yes.
Was he afraid that Rupiah Banda might rise? What motivated that action?
This is where I say there is this sickness, this shadowy group around presidents. President Sata resisted the prosecution of President Banda. Get it from me, I was in State House. He did not present the motion himself to lift the immunity.
We even debated if that was legal.
Yes. Yeah. I'll come back to this. I'll tell you, when he was about to go for treatment and people refused, he said, I don't want to interfere.
When Rupiah Banda was supposed to go for medical treatment.
And people held his passport. He said, I don't want to interfere with the judiciary, but if it must take that the president must go emergency, I will. find the legal process to get that passport, and Zambia Banda goes for treatment. I heard this myself. And he would come to visit President Sata, and sometimes he found those who resented Zambia Banda, he found them in the foyer, and President Sata told everyone else, and Zambia Banda would go in there. It was becoming very clear to all bureaucrats that there was no enmity between
the two.
And they would talk about their time as governor. They succeeded each other as governor of Osaka. And they lived on the same street on Several Road, where coincidentally I lived for a very long time.
You may be president one day. It's a street of presidents.
Yes, there was Dr. Kaunda's house there in retirement, President HH as an opposition leader there, Chiluba's house there, 4 houses there, that's where I lived. Then I was told that was Mr. Michael Sata's house, and across the road, that was President Zambia Banda. He said they would talk about how they used to visit each other. They would talk about how Henry Banda would spend holidays at Sata and how Mlenga Sata. So these were friends. So the process, it will lift the immediate. We must use that opportunity not to mislead any president into taking radical, dangerous, irrational decisions about their predecessors, because it can just hurt national unity. You saw how quickly that thing divided North and East. Easterners and Northerners are historic, but look at that action. There's no evidence. It was a responsible action by people who held grudges, but they did it in the name of the president. When, in fact, you ought to have been inside, like I was, to tell you that he did not. So you see, that was...
What were the weaknesses for Mr. Sata?
Mr. Sata's weaknesses were actually his failing health. He became president very quickly. His health was failing. Therefore, he wasn't very present in government. So some of his power was sublet to certain individuals who exercised it in his name, when in fact some of the things they did and said were not him. His major weakness also sometimes was he was becoming too hands-on. He did not trust individuals. He was impatient at procedure. He was impatient at fair. So because he wanted to be hands-on, a lot of frustrations came to him, and he wanted to jump procedures and do it. He was an expert in government procedure. He understood it, but I think he
would forget his president, and he wanted to be the expert.
So that also took a heavy toll on him.
Edgar Lungu, your boss.
Yes.
What were his strengths? What were his weaknesses? I know a discussion on President Lungu might take an hour because, that's where the work is, but we are discussing just on top casually, like we are reflecting on no president.
His major strength is his ability to delegate, to trust his lieutenants. Many times people came, I'll start with myself, then I'll come to Dr. Chiluba and others. These people are exercising your power. He's doing, but I appointed him because of that skill. Some of his criticism that he was allowing me to speak, he said, look, but if I speak every day, why are you a spokesperson? Some of the ignorant suggestions that I said, a lot of things that he did not have. Did you ever hear him once disapprove of anything I said? Not twice. Did you ever hear him disapprove of that? We discussed most of those things, but the president, then you can't be the presidential head, press head, if you are going to sit with him and get him to dictate a 3-page document. You go to him, Mr. President, we are facing a crisis in southern province. The deep tanks are dry and whatnot. You give a generic guidance. What you put in there, the wording and whatnot, might be yours, but the thinking is his. So his major strength is his ability to trust people. Because if you are president, you must trust people. Otherwise, you shouldn't run for president. It's 20 million people. You can't do everything. So he was able to. And also, if you criticize him as being unable to take charge of the media machinery, and then you want to praise his very competent, able spokesperson, how did he arrive at the choice of that person if he is not able? How would he appoint an excellent spokesperson if he himself doesn't have an excellent mind to be able to choose a person who will do an excellent job? So you can see that presidents sometimes criticize for being good. If a president begins to speak himself, it's an accident waiting to happen. That's why he has to be shielded. That's why he has aids. So that's one of his greatest strength. His greatest strength as well is to read. contrary to malicious allegations. No, you would be drunk. And you take a document there and you expect, we will read from page 1 to page 9. And you mark there. I can tell you.
Yeah.
I took the highest number of reports, maybe only second to the Secretary of the Cabinet and Director of Intelligence, because most of those things would come to me. And now he will read.
There was, I remember a good story and analysis. I think I lifted it from Tanzania. Apparently, there was a bilateral meeting between two presidents.
Yes.
And President Lungu, I think over Tazara,
Yes, over Tazara.
seemed to have surprised the journalist with the technical details
Yes.
he gave in that meeting. And they were saying, we know presidents speak on the top, but they don't speak to the particular technical details. So he was speaking off cuff, but speaking technical details.
Yes.
So it meant that he read the report.
Yes.
He wasn't just reading it.
And it was a thick report.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
President
yeah.
Magufuli was Minister of Communication and
Oh,
Transport
you remember
himself.
that event?
Yes, it was President Kikwete was president.
Yeah,
I remember
yeah.
that. I was there.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And then,
So there was a report by a journalist who was
they
very
wrote that.
impressed.
Yeah. No, it was one of his excellent performances. And also, because we apart from the job you asked me, what was the job of the spokesperson? You would brief him. And what he goes and repeats when he's now with his principals there, you would be surprised at his...
The assimilation.
The assimilation. The capacity to assimilate very quickly. The ability to repeat those things carefully, and the ability to scan the room and be able to direct the conversation in a certain direction was one.
As we come to the end, I want you to give me your reflections on Hakainde Hichilema.
Yeah.
He came on this crest wave of popularity, and he seems to have lost it within a period of 2 years.
Yes.
We have crises that have literally abound the country, whether it's in the health sector, economic sector, social sectors. What are your reflections on President Hakainde Hichilema? What are his strengths, and then what are his weaknesses?
Yes, the electoral mandate he got is only maybe comparable to Chiluba, if not bigger. So to have such an endorsement and to have a seeming disappearance of that within, we're just mid-term now. Is a phenomenal subject that political scholars must look at. I think that is very hands-on, and from looking from afar, is probably fatigued because there's a lot of paperwork on his table, and he wants to go through those things. He's less, probably I think, he's less trusting of his lieutenants, and therefore things are piling. But the greatest weakness is that he has not addressed the optimism that he created, the disconnect between the optimism he created and the reality. There is
The
no
campaign promises.
problem in revising your forecast. There is no problem in going back. And the greatest weakness, which is not his, is that his greatest strength then, the social media, is his greatest weakness now. Because in the age of recorded media, almost permanent footprint, people are just recording what he said.
They say the internet doesn't forget.
Yes, so he has this challenging phenomenon to balance the reality of government and what they saw when they were in opposition, and what I always refer to, the burden of responsibility.
Can he make a comeback at the rate his political fortune seems to have been lost?
We have a fertilizer crisis, which didn't go very well. We will see it in the harvest. We have a natural phenomenon, a drought, which is not is making. We have a debt restructuring program where he bet his hopes clearly off the rails. Whether you can see from his frustration that it's not his making, but certain things have gone wrong because he over-relied on the promises and the assurances of Western
Of his
institutions.
partners, perceived partners.
Who, I don't want to use betrayal. I'm trying no empirical evidence, but I think they are not following through on certain things they made. he banked on major announcements of the mining industry.
Maybe there are things he hasn't done himself. That's why his partners could be walking away.
Yes, if you understand, I'll reference myself with a caveat that I was brought up to believe in modest and occasional humility. But if you understand them the way I do, you ought to have understood that even if they asked that they promised that they will help you with debt restructuring, to go for 2.5 years and not allow a single opposition rally is a red line among those partners who were very supportive to him. They will not say it, but look, I'm a free person. If you ask me today, I'm just a political neutral. I must just call myself a patriot. I'll tell you, it's a red line for the British to go and remove the leader of the opposition and appoint one yourself. To lay siege on the headquarters of the opposition political party. This is a pure internal politics, but they are having infractions. There are infractions in there. So maybe they are.
So can he make a comeback? Political fortunes, how do you see as we march towards 2026?
You know the weather, you can't predict. How much of the maize stocks do we have in FRA sheds? How many years does it take to recover from one failed season? This one might fail, no fault of anyone. But again, this is a lesson to politicians, that what you said were failures of your predecessors
can come and haunt you.
No one should celebrate, should plot success on the back of national failure. But can we revise what we say about others and avoid malice? Avoid painting others. Because some of those things, like a drought, have come, and he can't cause a drought when he's president. And you rejoice at that. So the comeback depends on addressing, if you are a Western-backed candidate, fundamentals about democracy, good governance, are non-negotiable. Even if a serving prime minister or president wants you, the accountability before Congress, the British Parliament, there is no prime minister who will receive a report of a citizen being put on trial for offense he did not occur and they don't listen. Even if the prime minister loves you, get it from me, there will be a red flag there. There will be certain taps that will cross. So he has to address these fundamentals.
The shrinking
How is he
democratic
doing?
space,
Yes.
human rights issues.
Yes, the Catholic Church is speaking. It was very pro these values. You can't say they were pro-opposition, they stand on these things. The Western diplomats have begun to speak. These are the same, so the rule of law is fundamental. In the current democratic dispensation, there is no substitute. The human rights are universal, property rights are inviolable. There's a new phenomenon, and this one I can speak about because I do not have a single case of corruption before any court of law in the Republic of Zambia. So I can speak about that. The sanctity of any democracy and the assurance of success and harmony of any society is that you can't imagine that you wake up and your property is seized without a court order. That the bureaucrat somewhere will decide and say this is a proceeds of crime and you issue a forfeiture order. If a person has not run away, why shouldn't you take him before they provide evidence? I'm not saying the people doing that are wrong. Maybe the evidence before them is overwhelming. But in a functional democracy, the DPP is not from heaven. The IG is not from heaven. If any individuals will wake up and say that is a crime, the democracy we gave ourselves, the adjudicators is the judiciary. Put the evidence there and let people argue. So the phenomenon we are seeing is something close to seated, where if a governor of Chingora district decides that Amos Chanda's residence, there is a crime there, he will send vigilantes and they will seize your property. You can't have property rights not guaranteed. You can't have human freedom. It's freedom, liberty, and the rule of law. And that the judiciary, for all its weaknesses, present the evidence before them. Let there be a court order pronounced by the judiciary. And then you can seize private property.
The opposition if Hichilema fails, they'll be the ones to take over.
Yes.
What's your advice to the opposition and just what's currently happening as also you put your last words to this program?
The opposition must think about this, that the president, incumbent, and the immediate past president don't have to have a love relationship, but they must have a speaking relationship. There is a lot that the immediate past president has, and very true that the new president will have. If maybe you must divorce each other, wait even until the first term finishes. That's the institutional memory I'm talking about. So if the opposition now takes over, they must have a speaking relationship with Mr. Hichilema, because for the 5 years he will be in power, there is a lot that he's going to know that will help to advance this country. But to terminate that relationship on swearing there is tragic. I have been across...
No, we have a habit of harassing our former presidents, and I don't know when that cycle will end. I've
been formerly present under President Sata, President Lungu, and partially under President Chiluba, although not formerly. And again, even under President Banda. If I was serving I know Vice President George Kunda. I know the importance of institutional memory. You will know that we left a fantastic anti-cholera program. I was dispatched basically to work in the Ministry of Health with Dr. Chiluba. I can tell you that if that plan was in motion today, we would have dealt with this question. So what are we doing to this? So my last word over that question is that there must be a speaking relationship between the immediate past president and the one that's taken over. And as I'm saying, they don't have to love each other. If the country gives you the greatest honor to be president, you must listen to us when you say the two of you must be talking. The breakdown of a relationship between President Lungu and President Hichilema is regrettable. Yeah. And the two must find a way of having a speaking relationship. A lot will be much better. I'm speaking as somebody who has worked inside there. There is a lot that will be much better. They don't, as I have said, they don't have to be friends. But look, we gave them the mandate, the greatest honor.